ADHD lecture series. We're so excited that you joined us tonight to hear Dr. Jon Thomas, and hope that you will continue to join us to hear Elaine Taylor-Klaus speak for our January lecture. The mission of CHAD National and all of our chapters of CHAD is to improve the lives of children and adults who are affected with ADHD. We're a volunteer organization of trained professionals who offer support in a number of ways. We offer this free monthly lecture series on the second Tuesday of most months. We have support groups for parents, students, and adults. And we host a yearly resource fair to highlight ADHD Awareness Month that provides resources and information for our community. While we are volunteers, we cover other expenses through membership dues and donations. If you believe in our cause and have the funds to do so, we urge you to become a member if you are not already one. For 30 years, Dr. Jon Thomas has been involved in research, treatment, and training with adolescents and young adults who have ADHD. As the founder of the ADHD College Success Guidance Program, he's utilized this experience to develop an experiential residential college readiness success training program and an affiliated academic coaching model. His book, Thriving at the Edge of Chaos, Making ADHD a Superpower in College and Career, details the program components with engaging stories and illustrations that provides tools and strategies for students and adults to be successful. Coming this January, he will be offering a weekly podcast where he will continue to discuss current struggles that ADHDers are facing and how to overcome these obstacles to achieve their goals. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Pam, for that nice introduction, and thank you all for showing up tonight. In the book, I tried to create a common language that helps to explain some of the subjective aspects of ADHD so that people can feel heard and understood, and through this common language also access some skills and tools that will help them to, in my judgment, make ADHD a superpower. So what I'd like to do tonight, my hopes are that I'm going to help you to come to some common understanding or create a common language for some of what's going on right now with us and what we can do about it. So let me dip over here now to the, I'm going to disappear and put this slideshow up. Okay, does everybody see that?
Looks great.
Cool. Oh, all right, so thank you. Oh, hi, Becca and Ed. So this common language, there's going to be, here's some of the terms we're going to go through tonight. But again, the more we can understand, the more we have words that help us to express ourselves and a common understanding, the better we can embrace new ways of, new ideas and new ways of doing things. So tonight, I mean, this one word says everything. It says so many things. It's loaded. We're all going through this, and it means a whole lot of different things to different people. I read somewhere that we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. Some of us are in a yacht. Some are in a bathtub. But we're all struggling. So it's important to be nice to each other. But to say the pandemic has been a trying time is like the Old Testament Noah saying, "Looks like rain." So what I want to do is to explain to you how this is affecting people with ADHD, especially young people. I work with adolescents and young adults, college students and recent grads. Everyone's suffering, but I believe that people with ADHD are suffering in a different way, and want to talk about some of what that looks like. For example, high school students. A young man that I spoke with recently describes going through his day. It's an hour and a half of lecture and worksheets with all the cameras turned off. All he sees is the teacher's face and everyone else's initials. And he sits there trying to pay attention. This is a kid with ADHD, gets a 15-minute break, goes to the next class, lunch, third class, and by the fourth class, it's all he can do just to be present. And at the end of the day, he's crying in frustration and just the stress of it all. So it's challenging in ways that are above and beyond what people with ADHD are used to, or any of us are used to. But specific to ADHD in college, we have kids that are going through now. Many are in the middle of finals. They've been trying to make their way, hold it together, and pressing on, and they've gotten into the finals, and it's all they can do just to hold themselves together. They're going to come home burnout, depressed, anxious, stressed, because they went away to college looking for something very different than what they've gotten. They were looking for the social experience of connecting with new people and new ideas and ways of learning new outlooks on life. None of this happened. They've sat in a pod of a handful of people, or in some cases one or two, of the same people again and again doing online school. So yeah, they're burned out. So what I want to do in this presentation is talk about, is kind of explain how this burnout, how this the sort of the symptoms we're seeing, how that's come to be. Talk about how we can, and I specifically want to talk about what's known as surge capacity depletion, and give you some strategies to limit depletion and look at ways to approach restoring ourselves. So let me first talk about how some people respond differently to crises. Some people, they rise to the situation and grow. Some just survive, they endure, and others, well, they don't do so well. One of my favorite movies, if you haven't seen it, and I'm always looking for movies to watch during the pandemic, the Shaun of the Dead. We got these two characters here. Shaun's buddy here, all he does all day long is sit around and play video games. He's an introvert, and that's kind of all Shaun was doing as well. But then the zombie apocalypse happened, and this is the end of it. Shaun rises to the occasion. He becomes this leader. He saves people's lives. He finds new purpose and meaning in life, and his buddy becomes a zombie. But he's still doing the same thing. He's just playing computer games, but now he's a zombie and chained up. So way of thinking about it is that there's three ways that we can respond to any crisis or any experience in life. One is we can be fragile, we can be resilient, or we can be anti-fragile. The fragile is, and the examples are, fragile is like a candle in the wind. The wind blows and the candle goes out. Resilient is sort of like a campfire lantern. The wind can blow, but it's protected and it's not going to go out. It'll keep burning. Anti-fragile is more like a campfire. The more the wind blows, the brighter it blows. So this is a way of thinking is that, wow, I want to be anti-fragile. And there's a guy named Nassim Nicholas Taleb, a well-regarded economist who wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, Things that Grow from Chaos and Failure. This is where I grabbed this concept. But as great as it may look, as compelling as it may seem to be anti-fragile, it's also important at times to be fragile or resilient. And so it's just a matter of knowing what to do and when. I want to talk more about that as we go along. So let me tell you my story. At the beginning of this pandemic, I remember feeling this sort of a surge of energy, and this, I belong to a men's group that we meet every week. And I remember one night announcing, yeah, I was born for times like this. And I remember had all these projects. I was building out an office at home, built a gazebo and a fence and put in a garden and did a writing project or two, and then took on a coach training. I had a bunch of things I was doing. I was really hitting. I remember one of my favorite meditation people, Tara Brach, one of her lines was, "We've been training for these times." So I was pumping along. Of course, like all therapists, my caseload was an overload, and then something happened. I hit a wall, and suddenly I couldn't keep going the way I was going, and it happened fairly quickly. It felt like depression, and it felt like burnout, and it had hallmarks of depression. One of the things we call anhedonia, loss of interest in things that were previously enjoyable, fatigue, depressed mood. I lost my appetite. And so I checked in with my therapist and started talking, and I bumped into some old issues and worked through them. But I wasn't, I said, I don't know if this is depression or burnout or something in between. And then I came across this article on something called surge capacity depletion. And I said, that's it. Surge capacity depletion is what happens in systems where, like humans, we have a reserve, we have some capacity, some energy we hold into reserve. And in crisis, we'll surge with that reserve. And then when the crisis is over, we restore ourselves and come back to homeostasis. One of my favorite groups, being from the South, there's this group called the Cajun Navy. During whenever we have a hurricane, these guys go out in boats and they work around the clock rescuing people from their homes. And then when it's over, they all hang out and they go home, they rest, they restore, and and then they come back to they come back to homeostasis. So the thing is right now, whoops, I'm missing a slide here. The thing is that crises like this have beginnings, middles, and ends. The hurricane hits, there's the aftermath, people go out and rescue people, and then it's all over and they rest, and then it's on to the next thing. We've been doing this for a long, long time. I remember at the beginning, when in the first few months of this, we're like I tell people, we're at the beginning, we're looking for where the middle is. Now we're at the middle and we see an end in sight, and that's hopeful. But the thing is, it's been going on and on and on. It's a crisis that's not ended. So we've been surging against an ongoing crisis that's depleted us. And the problem is we don't have the usual ways of restoring ourselves. So we're hit from both sides. Now, so let me say that again. People have been surging until they're depleted, and then there's no traditional spontaneous ways of restoring their resources. So people with ADHD, we're more likely than others to surge in times of crisis because of this novelty effect, the stimulation, all those things that cause people with ADHD to show up in the kind of professions that like ER docs and first responders, and there's that stimulation. So we're more prone to surge. And similarly, the novelty and stimulation that we seek and variability in restoring ourselves is not here. What they say, what works this week doesn't necessarily work next week. Our resources for restoring ourselves are depleted, and it's and it just feels like crap. And so what I realize as I'm reading this article on surge capacity depletion is that, well, that's what's happening with me. And the light popped on and things started changing. So this is what we're facing, I believe, surge capacity depletion. So what do we do? I remember, here's what not to do. Some of the advice I remember hearing, I can't even remember, I wish I could remember this person's name, but it's something like, if you're not, during this pandemic, if you're not completing some major project, writing a book, learning a foreign language, so forth, so on, you're a loser. Well, that's, it's not only is it unhelpful, but it's caustic and damaging, because a way of thinking about it, well, this is my quote, we don't have the luxury of thinking this way now. A way of thinking about this is that, and this is one of the models we use with young people we work with, that anytime you have a goal or a problem you want to solve, it requires three things: method, motive, opportunity. You need to know how to do it. You need to be able to motivate yourself, and you need to have the opportunity, all the elements and resources necessary to accomplish it. Well, so for some people in the pandemic, this crisis has produced the opportunity of time, a lot of time on their hands. Other people, maybe not. And motivation, a lot of people are demotivated. Some people don't have jobs. Some people are staying home with their kids and struggling just to get through the day. So I find this self-styled guru's advice is short-sighted. I think it's important to try to make best of our opportunities, but I don't know, it just seemed critical. So what do we do instead? One of my favorite therapists in the world, Brene Brown, points out this quote right here. She also talks about the importance of vulnerability, but we don't have the luxury of exhausting ourselves as we had before. We need to be more intentional in how we maintain ourselves through the balance of this pandemic. So how do we do that? And what do we do? First, it's the understanding what's going on. And I'm selling people on this idea of surge capacity depletion. I hear friends of mine or colleagues or clients talking about, they'll say these same words. It's like, yeah, I can't tell if it's depression or burnout, and don't enjoy doing what I used to do. And I keep hearing it again and again from people. And so I throw this idea of surge capacity depletion out. They say, yes, that's it. There's something liberating about understanding what's going on. There's something very powerful when we can name what we're facing. So the first part of this is understanding how it's showing up in your life, understanding how this is working. Second is to learn how to monitor and manage your energy, stress, and emotion. We need to manage our resources. We can't just surge in an uncontrolled fashion. And thirdly, we need to vigorously, intentionally discover and pursue new ways of restoring. The old ways are not here. We're going to need to be creative and find new ways. And so this is what I want to talk more about. So first, again, understanding there's a power in just naming and calling out what's going on here. There's a student I was working with that was talking about, I was checking in with him about his grades, and he said, yeah, I did that classic midterm slump. And I said, well, tell me how that worked. He said, well, I kind of waited too late to get some things done. And so I worked real hard and pushed and burned the midnight oil, and I got ready for midterms, and I took them, and then I was exhausted. And so I missed a few days of class. I started talking to him about, so here's this surge capacity depletion thing. And he said, yeah, it's like that. Except this is an example of the surge of midterms has a beginning, middle, and end. That's a matter of days. And that's something we can recover from. And as he, I said, well, how would you want to do this differently in the future? And he's like, well, okay, I'll use this surge that I'm pushing through to do my midterms to do a couple of days of homework ahead, and then I'll take a few days off and recover. Brilliant idea. It's liberating when we understand what's going on. There's power in naming and naming what we're facing. So first, let's think about, how do you monitor? When we think about I never sat around and said, wow, I wonder what my energy level is today, or what's my capacity, where are my reserves, and am I depleting or restoring, and most importantly, what's tapping my energy? I never did that. And again, we don't have the luxury of not doing some things now. So these are the kind of questions that are important to ask, and to get in the habit of asking ourselves periodically. an example I think of is in computer games. There's every computer game has this life bar or energy bar where you know how many lives you have or how long you can play or what your resources are. Think of it like that. We need to be consciously minding the store in terms of how much energy we have. Where's it going? So what are the kind of things that drain our energy? One is stress. So when we think about stress, there's all sort of research and information about it. There's physical aspects, psychological aspects, ways it shows up in depression, anxiety, and some of the long-term hormonal effects of it. But a way of thinking is stress is our response to a situation that taps our energy. And in fact, it doesn't have to necessarily be a negative situation. There's a concept of eustress. It's stress that occurs around positive events, like a wedding's a happy event, but it's, even happiness can if we don't deal with that emotion, can knock us down. So here's a model that we use with young people we work with. The way of thinking about stress is that there's this wagon that we're pulling, but we're facing away from it. And typically we're not turning around and looking and say, wow, what's in here? What am I pulling? We just pull. And if we ever turn around and look at all, it's because, well, we can't pull anymore, or it's gotten too heavy, or we're getting exhausted. So it's only that typically at those times that we turn around and say, wow, what have I been pulling in this wagon? So once people stop and turn around and look, they're surprised to find that maybe they're not pulling the most important stuff, or maybe they are. One of the models we use, again, with young people is this concept of crystal, steel, and plastic. We do this thing where we throw these objects around the room in our groups, and when they drop, we talk about, okay, well, this is plastic, and some of the things in life, they're important enough to carry, but they're not, they're the least important things. Like, students will admit, yeah, computer games is maybe plastic. Steel is more important. And there's things in life that are maybe some aspects of socialization, or some hobbies that we have, that it's more important. It's not just trivial, but it's not the most important thing. So while these two, cup and steel cup is flying around the room in this sequence, I'd grab this wine glass and throw it out, and the instructions are, well, to catch it and throw it to the next person in that same sequence, while these other two objects are floating around. Well, something happens in the room, the tension changes. Everybody's just like real careful and real focused. I said, that's the energy that lets you know what's crystal in life. So if we think about the stuff in our wagon, we want to be sure that we're putting priorities to what's crystal, what's steel, and what's plastic. And if there's something that needs to drop out, well, of course it's going to be plastic. So this is just a way of a visual touchstone for monitoring what we're carrying, what's contributing to our stress, and what's important. So let's say you got all this stuff in your wagon, and then along comes this, we call it the cauldron. We'll talk more about what that means. Sometimes it's the straw that broke the camel's back. So let me just summarize this. When it comes to stress, it's important to develop a daily habit of inventorying your wagon. What's in your wagon? Organize your wagon according to crystal, steel, and plastic priorities. And one of the things that's important is to realize that your feelings around what's in the wagon can sometimes be a stressor in and of itself. Emotion itself can be a stressor. So that's a nice segue into what we're talking about is monitoring and managing your energy, your stress, and your emotion. So think about emotion as a stressor. First step is to learn something about emotion. So here, this is just the model that we use with the young people we work with. We can come up with, first is again, naming is liberating. And to put a name to what we're feeling has a power that's documented in neuroscience. There's a part of our brain, the amygdala, that when people are experiencing anxiety is vibrating, or intense emotion is vibrating. And when they call out that feeling, they put a name to it, it stops vibrating. There's a power in naming. So what we do, we teach that there's all these different feelings that we could come up with thousands of them tonight if we all sat here and started calling them out. But to make it easier and to be able to name it more easily, we say there's 5 basic feelings: glad, sad, mad, afraid, ashamed, and all these other words, all these other adjectives will fit beneath one or more of these. Now, here's the thing. The bane of our existence is that we can and often do have all 5 feelings going on at any given time. We only think about feeling something, one feeling, because it may be more intense than the others, but there's others that all of them can be going on at any given time. So we teach people is to identify them, call them out, and put a number to them, scale them on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. What is your glad, sad, mad, afraid, ashamed today? So naming is liberating. Now, next is understanding, how do we create these stories? How do we create these emotions? We're taught to believe, or we spontaneously think that something happens, there's an experience, and then we have an emotion. In fact, what we've learned through many years in psychology, and there's many different versions of what I'm saying here, is that there's an intermediate phase, there's an evaluation where in microseconds, we tell ourselves a story about what's happening. It's that story that creates the emotion. Now, a story is something like, well, if I hear a siren outside, I may make a lot of meaning of it and think, well, something's happened to a neighbor, and or there's a fire, and I'll have fear. But then I'll look outside, and let's say maybe it's a parade. I say, oh, well, okay, and then I'll feel glad. I won't feel afraid anymore. A story can be retold. You can give new information and retell it. Stories in time, though, when things happen over and over again with us, they become a narrative, and narratives over time become beliefs. So one of the important ways of understanding how we can monitor and make sense of our emotions is that there's what is the story? What are we telling ourselves? And if it's a story that we can bring new data to, new experience to, that will restore it, great. And just knowing if it's a narrative or a belief that we're dealing with something deeper, that's important as well. There's this thing called the second arrow concept that, it's like people are telling themselves now during the pandemic, wow, I'm alone, I'm isolated, and I don't see people, and I'm sad, and I'm lonely, I'm depressed. They tell themselves a story, and that's the first arrow. That's painful. It creates sadness. But then they do the second arrow, which is, I'm the only one that feels this. I'm the only one that's like this. And that feels even worse. So a restoring here is that, yeah, there's some things going on here. It's tough. There's beginning, middles, and ends. And we're in the middle looking toward the end. And I'm going to do what I can do to restore myself. And I'm not alone. That's a restoring. That changes the emotion. That's how we create this emotion. And understanding that is key to learning how to manage it. Finally, once we create an emotion, we need to do something with it. It's just neurochemical energy. It needs to have an outlet. It goes into expression, or it can become a source of motivation, and we can turn it into action. When we do that spontaneously, sometimes it doesn't turn out well, especially anger. When we do it with forethought, like going for a run when you're angry, it's a different thing. Putting it into expression, finding some outlet, is an important thing to do as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about meditation later on. Meditation is a form of expression. It's a self-expression. It's a conversation with ourselves in some ways that helps us to manage the emotion that we're experiencing. So that's just my theory I'm putting out here. But if we don't put this emotion into expression or motivated action, it goes into what I call the cauldron. This is just this reservoir inside of us of unexpressed emotion and energy. There's all kind of names for it in different fields. Some people think of it as stored in our proprioceptor muscles, and there's types of massage that massage it out. It could be in our hippocampus. I just use this as a metaphor for what happens when we don't express it. So the thing is, when we've got all this stuff of stress that we're trying to balance, sometimes the emotion, the extra element of emotion, can be what topples our stress wagon and puts us into meltdown. So here's what I'm saying. Recommending is important for monitoring and managing your emotion. Do this 5 feeling check-in as a daily habit. Get it to be a habit more than one time a day. Colleagues, friends, partner will set me down every now and then and say, hey, something's bothering you. Give me a 5 feeling check-in. And then just be curious about what are the limiting stories you're telling yourself. We tell ourselves stories that make us happy, that fulfill us. But there's also limiting stories. There's things that we tell ourselves that we're not aware of. And it's those hidden stories that we're telling that can be the worst. Really important. Once you create emotion, and we're all creating a lot of it now, be sure you find healthy expressions or actions for your emotion. And finally, make it a habit of inventorying, looking at what's in your cauldron. Just be curious. What's in my cauldron today? And find ways of emptying it. Again, different forms of exercise, and I'm a big fan of yoga. That's a big one. And meditation are good ways of dealing with emptying the cauldron. Of course, therapy is helpful with that as well. And again, therapists, colleagues of mine seem to be overbooked these days. So that leads to some of what can we do if you can't locate a therapist. We'll get into that here in a moment. So the third thing is we need to restore ourselves. And the problem, again, we don't have the same avenues to restore that we've had for spontaneously restoring ourselves. We've part of just growing up and becoming as people is that we learn what we like and what works for us and what we enjoy doing. A lot of those avenues are closed off to us now. So what we're facing is the need to consciously, intentionally choose to find new ways to restore ourselves. That's the resilience part of this. If you think about surviving, just kind of keeping ourselves in some level of homeostasis, finding ways to restore our energy. I mentioned yoga, I mentioned running. There's all these things that you may think of spontaneously, but or with just a little thought. But when we think about emotions, how do you monitor and manage your emotions if on an ongoing basis? This is the part where it's important to be fragile, meaning vulnerable, meaning letting yourself admit that there's things going on. What is working for people is finding neighborhood pods where they can have these kind of conversations in 3-dimensional time and space with neighbors. There's online groups that are forming. There's support groups, and when you can't, and if you don't have any of those available to you, you can create one but all of these require a vulnerability. They require you being fragile, saying, yeah, I got some stuff going on. and finding that place within you to share that, and that motivation to find or form a place for it. Oh, I kind of got ahead of myself. So again, seek and create new virtual connections through organizations. Some of our standard go-tos for social connection are still there, but they're virtual. They're two-dimensional now. Another way of thinking is think about your deeper passions. One of the dare I say silver linings of the pandemic has been it's required people to be more introspective. It's required them to examine what we're doing and why. We're finding deeper meaning in our experiences. So also there's some things that I've caught students doing that they've told me about. I've got a college student who he talks about feeling isolated, and he goes online and he sees the professor. Some people have their cameras turned off. There's no interaction. It's all a one-way sort of a one-dimensional kind of experience. And he said he found, this is a Nova student, he said, then I found on Canvas, there's this place where you can connect with other students in your class. And so I started just hitting people with emails and saying, you want to get together and do a study group or a study buddy, or we have this concept in ADHD land called the body double, just where the presence of another person exerts a force of focus and attention and motivation for us. And so he's reached out, he's created this virtual study group, and has one or two homework partners. So that's the kind of stuff that was maybe occurred when you were in a classroom and you happened to get to know somebody next to you. But again, in these times, we're going to need to be intentional about it. We're going to need to reach a little bit further. Had a high school student just last week said, they talk about how all the cameras are off and there's reasons for that. And I said, well, what are the, I know the reasons that, people are afraid they'll take pictures of them, post them online. And he said, well, a lot of people don't want to be the first one to turn the camera on. And he said, and what I'm going to do tomorrow morning is I'm going to turn my camera on, see what happens. So it's like taking a risk and stepping out, reaching out. I think about the difficulty that we're facing now, again, in this thing of managing our resources and not depleting and restoring. One of my heroes was a man named Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was in a Nazi prison camp. And while there, he developed this whole new perspective on therapy called logotherapy. And one of the things that I remember in reading is that he said that, there were days that all I could do is look out the window and see the sun come up and celebrate that and be glad for it. What we're finding in neuroscience research today is that people who are happiest are those who can every day find something that they can call out that they appreciate, they're grateful for, they're glad about. This is another very good habit to get into. I know you've probably heard this a whole lot, but gratitude lists are valuable and they're important things to have down. It's another good habit to install. Meditation, I mentioned that there's tremendous benefits to meditation. We find that it increases all sorts of flexibility and growth in the brain, neuroplasticity. Again, I see this as a conversation with self that helps to empty the cauldron, that helps to kind of reform our stories, our narratives. And there's guided meditations that help us do that. So guided meditations are important for people with ADHD. But why? Because, well, we have trouble paying attention. I remember when I first started just meditating, this classical meditation, I found it like mind numbing. I was distracted. I would keep coming back, to come back to the breath. But there wasn't enough there. And for people with ADHD, if we don't have enough stimulation, we will create the stimulation inside us in our imaginations and our mental wanderings. So there's very neat, what we call guided meditations. One of my favorites is Tara Brach, who does some magnificent work. I think we have, as part of the takeaway here, there's her website, tarabrock.com. She has a colleague named Jack Kornfeld who has some different meditations, guided meditations around specific subject or specific issues. Guided meditations work well with people with ADHD, I've found, because they're guided, because they give us a sort of an internal structure that we can follow more easily while doing the valuable work of meditation. So in terms of some of the, well, there's the Tara Brach website. Also want to recommend, if you haven't seen it yet, Brene Brown has a TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. It's like, I don't know, 12, 14 minutes. And I recommend that you haven't seen it, you watch that. It's for times like this, for helping us learn how to touch that part of ourself that needs healing. I also threw in meetup.com because just, sort of on a lark, I'm thinking, well, I wonder what's out there. And I found all kind of stuff. And some of you may already have discovered this, but meetup.com started off as a group of kids meeting up for skateboarding adventures, and it's expanded to thousands of different subject matter. There's last Friday there was one on does free will exist? Anything you want you can find on meetup.com. It's pretty extraordinary. And so what I've pulled from tonight, I'm plugging my book again, but if you want to dive down deeper into this, chapters 11 through 14 is where I pulled most of what I've presented to you tonight. So what I've been doing here is describing to you, and my hopes is explaining how this idea of surge capacity depletion is an important and useful model for what's been happening, and that by being able to call it out, identify with it, to name it, that gives you some freedom, some movement toward doing two things. One is learning how to monitor and manage your resources, and secondly, how to consciously, or at least set the intention to restore yourself. And again, oftentimes, it just takes the intention, setting the intention. Like the young man who decided he was going to come up with a better way of dealing with the mid-semester slump. Once he identified this and set that intention, creativity took over from there. As you set an intention, say, hey, you know what? Yeah, this sucks, and I'm choosing to be happy, and I want to find ways to be happy and to restore myself. Your curiosity will carry you in some directions you may not have gone before. And finally, a cautionary note. I'm saying this to myself as well as to you all. I surged at the beginning of this pandemic. As I said, I got a lot of things done. I accomplished a whole bunch, and I paid the price. It hit me hard. When I burned out, it hit me hard. I had to really consciously work at restoring myself. I do yoga twice a day, meditate twice a day. I reach out to friends, family. I do a lot of things intentionally and consciously. Now, I said things, there's beginnings, middles, and ends. We're now at the middle and we're looking toward the end. We see an end in sight. The temptation of people with ADHD is going to be to surge again. And that's the, it's sort of like what I call sharky waters. It's like, I remember a survivor of who got shipwrecked, talked about their month's experience at sea. And the scariest part was when a ship was there to rescue them. They had to jump off of their raft and swim to the boat. That's when they were worried about, they were the most afraid because the end was in sight. And they were there, I call that sharky waters. It's right now we're kind of like in sharky waters. It's a time, when the cavalry's coming, you don't stop fighting, you keep fighting. And so that's what we need to do now. We need to still be mindful that we can burn ourselves out, and that we need to be thoughtful about it. I always like to say the only person who tried to sprint a marathon died doing it. The ancient fellow, the Greek soldier who ran to marathon, basically when he got there died because it exerted himself. So don't try to sprint a marathon is my advice on this. Let's see here. I think part of our takeaway too, there's a glossary of terms that we've talked about. And I think we'll be sending this stuff out to you as a takeaway. And so I thank you for attending and for your attention. And looks like we have time for questions and answers.
Yes, we sure do.
All right. Well, I'll just hit the stop share here and come back to the screen.
So if anybody has any questions, nobody posted in the chat, which is okay, and that's fine. If you have a question, you can unmute your mic, and hopefully we won't have too many people crossing over for questions. So anybody may start.
All right, this is Dave Shannon. I'm actually first in the list, so I guess I can talk first. Dr. Thomas, I'm an adult, so I know that your focus and a lot of your examples were dealing with younger kids, but I'm not even sure if I actually have ADHD. I have two different psychologists right now who are debating whether I'm past or what exactly I have, but I certainly have hit a wall, as you said, and I've been on some narcotic class 2 substances for many years, and as the pandemic was just starting, I was trying to wean myself from them, and I had to go back onto them because I was having difficulty motivating and stuff. So I guess my question is, as an adult, I just turned 58 today, so I'm not a youngster. And I seem to have hit plateaus during my career in life where I kind of reached a certain pinnacle of capability, and then I would plateau, and then I would have to recover and pick up from there. But the pandemic, like you said, these are different times, different characteristics. So I'm getting hammered with multiple things right now. Is the best thing to just kind of like do a timeout with everybody? I have 2 elder parents who aren't living where they were living 2 months ago. They're in elder care situations that I'm involved with. I changed jobs during the pandemic, but the new job wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, which was less stressful and more relaxing. Quite the opposite.